Hi, everyone, and welcome to Being Youthful, the podcast, episode 1. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Kim Beegler. I am the owner of Youthful Fiber Farm and Mill, and I am sitting here in Halsey, Oregon, which is where I have the actual mill where I do processing of all the fibers and yarns for everybody. So, just before I forget, places that you can find me, our website are ewethfulfiberfarm.com. On Instagram, we are Youthful Fiber Mill, and on Facebook we are Youthful Fiber Farm and Mill. So all sorts of places that you can reach us. Anyway, I am so glad that you've decided to join me for a little bit of time today, and I'm going to try to keep these fairly short and talk to you a little bit about different things that are going on at the mill and different things I am working on, in addition to getting you behind the scenes a little bit and letting you see how it is that I process out fiber and what goes into it and the thought and the work and the machines and everything behind it. So my goal with doing this podcast is just to allow you all to kind of come along for the ride. I'm hoping to be able to let you in on what it's like to own a mill, to run a mill, to process out fibers, as well as having farm animals and just everyday life, right? And I'm hoping to kind of split the podcast into segments as far as each time I'll talk a little bit about hand spinning, a little bit about knitting, and then also, of course, about the mill and kind of show you what I'm working on that day and maybe have some videos of me actually working when I can get my husband in to film that. Not so easy to film it and do the work yourself. So that's kind of my general gist of how I'm hoping this will go. And my point of doing it is just, it's really important to me, and the longer I've been in the fiber industry and the longer I've been hand spinning and learning about wool and fiber, it's become really important to me that people know, I like to say, know your wool, that you know where it's coming from. Just like every other industry, everybody is kind of getting more interested in where is our food and all these different sources. Where are we getting these things, and how can we be more natural and sustainable in the process? So that's what I'm hoping to help teach people a little bit about, is where your yarn and your fibers come from and how you can make some decisions and efforts to kind of support a more sustainable craft for yourself. Or you just want to come and watch me talk about hand spinning, knitting, and owning a wool mill. So, and I'll kind of get into some of the details too as I go along about just what it takes and what you need to, if you are thinking about starting a mill. So maybe this is a good place to watch for that too. I know I personally got intrigued after I listened to a podcast with a mill owner on it, and I didn't even really know what a mill was until I listened to that. So you never know, right? And please, if you like this, hit the like button, subscribe, put comments down below of things you'd like me to talk about, because the more input I have from you, the better I can make this, hopefully. So here we are, a little bit about me. Again, I said my name's Kim Beegler. I own the fiber farm and mill along with my husband, who doesn't work so much in the mill. His main job is to handle equipment when I call and say something's not sounding right, which is a big thing for me to not have to worry about, that I can just make that phone call. So, and we also have our farm. My husband's actually a grass seed farmer. He's third generation, and he farms here in and around Halsey and Harrisburg in Oregon, and they farm grass seed. So that's a whole different thing. Sometimes you'll hear me talk about it depending on the time of year and what's going on here. Sometimes I'm really overwhelmed with our life responsibilities as he's working more, and other times, like right now, as we come into the winter, things have lightened up for him on farming, so it allows me to spend a little bit more time on Youthful in the mill and processing. So I got into this randomly, I'll tell you. My mom taught me to knit when I was young, and she was kind of an on and off knitter. She also quilted. She did all sorts of things. So she would kind of go through a period of really knitting a lot, and then it would go back down. And I think when she would really knit a lot, I'd say, hey, can you teach me? And then time and time again, she would have to teach me to cast on, right? So it wasn't up until I was in Portland, and I guess I was in my late 20s, early 30s, that I decided that I wanted to try to actually pick it up without my mom casting on for me, right? So I took a class and started from there. I took how to knit a hat class, so I learned how to knit in the round, and that gave me a lot more skills and a lot more confidence to keep going on. And I used to live up in Portland. I owned another business up there, And that business, I worked a lot, a solid 70 hours a week. So I didn't have a lot of time for knitting, but it became a little bit more of my daily life when I could make the time for it. So when we moved down here, I met my husband up in Portland, and we moved down here. And I should say, I have always been a city girl, always. My family thought it was crazy that we were moving down here, that I specifically was moving down here. So it's been a transition, right? And when we moved down, we just had our dogs and our cats, and we moved into the family century old farmhouse, and that's where this all started, really. And I was knitting more once we moved down here. I certainly had a lot more time to knit. I still had my business up in Portland, but I was doing more hands off and just doing behind the scenes books and managing the managers, really, right? So it allowed a little bit more freedom for me to do things here. So I was knitting more, and I got my first sheep. And my first sheep came to me because I was looking on Craigslist. How do we find so many things these days, right? So I ended up driving up to Portland, and I got this sheep, and I knew nothing about sheep, but I knew we had a lot of grass fields, and so we had places for them to eat, right? So I went up to Portland, and I literally had, isn't it funny, I had to go back up to Portland to get my first sheep. And I knew that he was a Shetland sheep, but I didn't really know. I was like, oh, it's a wool sheep. Okay, because before that, my yarn came from a yarn shop, right? If I wanted yarn, I just went to the yarn shop. I felt around for soft, squishy things that were in pretty colors, and I took them home. So this was kind of my first foray into where my wool was actually coming from. And so I went up, and I had I borrowed a van, and I had a dog crate in it because dogs is what I knew up until that point. I owned a dog hotel, was what I did in Portland. So I knew dogs like the back of my hand. So I had my dog crate, and I had a leash, and I showed up at this place, and lucky for me, my first sheep was Tweedle, and he was young. He was probably 6 months when I got him, and I wrapped that little leash around his neck, and thank goodness he just kind of followed me out. We walked up the driveway, I popped him in the crate, and I remember about halfway home stopping for coffee, and I gave him a couple apple chunks, and he did his first baa, and I don't know, it just took me over the moon. It was just amazing. So I felt pretty hard for him, and I got him home. We had this tiny little fence area set up for him, and got him home, and then was like, I gotta get another sheep, because you really shouldn't just have one sheep. So I ran out the next day, back on Craigslist, found another Shetland sheep, brought her home. That's Drilla, who we still have, and that's how it began, really. And my first Christmas of having them, my husband bought me a spinning wheel, and I was like, that looks fun, right? And he put it together, and it sat there for probably 4 months before I finally signed up to take a class and learned hand spin. And thank goodness, because the first time I took something to the mill, I realized what happens when you go to the mill is that they send you something back, and then you're supposed to do something with it. So anyway, it was not the easiest thing, and I'll talk about that, learning to hand spin, that is. It wasn't intuitive for me. I definitely struggled with it more than anybody else in the class, but I kept at it, and eventually, look what happens. You never know. So anyway, okay, so we have our first sheep. We did our first shearing. I sent it up to this mill, and when I got it back, and I'll admit I was probably the worst mill client ever because I had no idea what skirting was. I skirted it, but I didn't really know what I was doing necessarily. I think YouTube played a big part in that. But I took it up, and the product that came back, I was just floored. I had several bags of roving that looked like, I'll show you. This is called a bump of wool, and this is the roving here. You can see it. So she handed me back all these bags, and I was like, okay, here we go. Let's do this spinning thing, right? And so I took my first class, and then I promptly took a second class, and that was where things really started to change for me. And I made sure I was spinning regularly, and it wasn't always perfect, but it's gotten me to where I am today. So not long after I had my first stuff processed, I got word that the wool mill that I had gone to, that she was retiring, and the wool mill was going to be up for sale. And it just so happened that I had my current business in Portland up for sale, and it was pending. And so I went up to the mill for the first time and really walked around with the owner, and was completely overwhelmed. Like, no way could I do this. There's machines everywhere. There's ductwork. There's electrical. There's big machines. I've never worked with machines. I've worked with live beings. I've never worked with actual manufacturing equipment. And so I just thought, no way. And we walked around, and I was intrigued by it, but I remember asking on my way out the door, I said, so do you still hand spin? Because that was how she had gotten into it. And she pointed over to her e-spinner that was underneath piles of paper, and she said, well, there's my spinner. And I thought, no, I'm selling a business that took all this time for me. There's no way that I'm going to get back into something and not have the time to do the crafts that I now so love and are such a part of my life. So my business sold. I didn't really get back to her. And then I saw her. I think I saw her at Black Sheep Gathering, which is a big festival up here. And I think I turned around and walked away like, oh my God, don't see me. And then a few months later, there was another festival, which is Oregon Flock and Fiber, which is up in Canby, Oregon, not too far from here. And I saw her and I was like, I'm officially no longer a business owner. I'm just like living the dream at this festival. So I went up and talked to her and I said, hey, is your equipment still for sale? And she said, I actually am just finishing up. And she handed me the price sheet list. And I called my husband and I said, I don't know. Maybe this is meant to be. Like, I've walked away from it for several months and maybe this is supposed to be. So we went up again. And this time we went with my in-laws. We were on our way to on a family trip to Boston, and we stopped by the mill on the way to the airport, and we all walked through, and I actually bought at that time her washing system and her drying rack, and I believe her picker too. So I bought a few pieces, and when we left, I kind of talked to my husband and his dad on the way, and I said, what do you think? And they were like, no big deal. That equipment is easy for us to work on. It's not that hard to set up. You can do this if you want to do it. And I was like, well, that's great, because I just bought a few pieces of equipment. Not all of it, but a little bit. So that's kind of how it started. We flew to Boston. I had my notebook with me, and anytime I was in that hotel room, I was writing a business plan, because I had a little bit of money to put into it, but I certainly didn't have all of the money, which I can talk about later, what it looks like to buy a mill or to start a mill, but I didn't have it all. So long story short, after fighting yet again in my life with banks, not fighting, but just putting up the struggle that you should have to, right? You need to go through the hoops to prove that you're actually going to stick to this and be able to pull it off and pull through on it. So we did that for a couple months with the banks, and they gave me a loan for the rest of the equipment. So I started milling in, I believe, around October of 2016. So we're just over 4 years that I've been doing this. We're in an old historic building here in Halsey, and at the end of this, I'm just going to take you on a quick little tour for this episode and just show you what the space looks like, what my mill equipment looks like, and let you in on a little bit of that. It has been a life-changing experience for sure, a giant learning curve. If I thought hand sprinting was a learning curve, woo! But I wouldn't change it. I love it, and every day I come to work, I'm excited to be here. So anyway, that's a little bit about how I got here, and now I'm going to talk to you about some fiber. And the first thing I was going to talk about was Jacob wool. And Jacob is a specific breed of sheep. There's lots and lots and lots of breeds of sheep, and there's also breeds of sheep that are not wool sheep. They're made more, we call them commercial sheep if they're going to be used for meat purposes. There's also, of course, some milk sheep, and then there's wool sheep, and a lot of times they can overlap, but not necessarily do they always. So Jacob sheep are a heritage breed sheep, which means they have been around for a very long time, basically, and they grow really well here in Oregon. We have a pretty harsh climate as far as rain, so it's best, or I should say easiest, to grow sheep that are going to grow well here to minimize some of the work you're going to have to put in. So the things that can affect, the rain can affect on sheep is if the fleeces are too dense, a lot of times the water will get in, it doesn't have a chance to dry out, and they can get something called wool rot, which will destroy the wool. A lot of times you can coat sheep, which is literally putting a coat over them, kind of like a dog coat, but lighter, and it's designed for going over fiber. That's a lot of money, and it takes a lot of time, as you have to change them out as the fleeces grow, and you do risk the fiber rubbing on the coat, which can cause some issues with processing. So So we do have some of those sheep here, but those shepherds take a lot more time to make sure their fiber comes out. And then also feet is another big thing out here because the ground is so wet a lot of the year. Excuse me, that's my washer turning off. Anyway, because the ground is so wet a lot of the year, there is something called foot rot where the sheep just, their feet are wet too much and it's hard on their feet, basically, long and short of it. So some of the heritage breeds do better on wet. I shouldn't say better, but they do better than other breeds in the wet climate. And that's one of the reasons they're heritage breeds, right? They're pretty hardy breeds. So Jacob, and I'm going to try to get a picture in here so you can see a sheep, what Jacobs look like. Jacob are heritage sheep. They have not the finest wool. It really depends, but they're in the medium, I would say, as far as wools go. And I have a little clump of Jacob wool that I'm going to show you here, and hopefully I'll get the picture up. But a lot of times Jacob sheep are multiple colors. They tend to be white with brown spots, or brown with white spots, or black and gray, and kind of a light gray that almost is a lavender color. So this is what their fiber looks like, and I'll see if I can pull a little lock out for you. So here's a lock of white. You can see, and sometimes I'll talk about staple length. Staple length is actually how long from here to where I'm stretching down is. That's the staple length of a piece of fiber. So this is some Jacob wool, and I just recently processed out a huge batch of, I call it it's our Youthful Jacob yarn. So this wool I get from about an hour north of us from a small farm where they have Jacob sheep, and they don't necessarily use the wool themselves. They do breeding and they sell the sheep out. So every year I buy out their fleeces from them, and it works really well for both of us. So this is what it looks like. This is washed, so they bring it to me straight off the sheep in bags, and I skirt it out, which means pulling all the vegetable matter, all that stuff out of it that I don't want in it, and then it gets washed and it looks like this. So I have a couple, after it looks like this, remember that bump I showed you? Once I go through a couple stages, which I'll show you guys in time, it comes out in roving. So this is hand spinning. It's ready for hand spinning. This is roving. And I'm just going to show you a little bit because it's really important to know making yarn is very simple. So here's your roving. If I twist it, it becomes yarn. That's all there is to it. And you can see in between, it stays together once you put that twist in it. Those fibers stay together. And if I wanted something to be a thinner yarn, I would just, this is called drafting, where I'm pulling some of those fibers out, and then I would put twist in that smaller, and then I have a smaller yarn. So making yarn, in theory, is quite simple, right? You're just adding twist to fiber. So this is a bump of Jacob roving, and you can hand spin that out like this, and I'll show you. Here's another. This is just a big ball of more of the dark. And so I get these different colors. Mainly when I am going through and skirting, I separate the colors out. So I'll pull the white bits out and leave, the dark stuff by itself, or I'll do a mix of 50-50, or if there's enough white, I can get more of a white Jacob. So that's how I get the different natural colors of yarn, which I have got some examples. Okay, so some natural colored yarn. So here is what that dark looks like once it's all spun up. You can see the difference. I have them side by side. Then we have a gray. So that's what that looks like once it's all spun up into yarn. And I had a white here, but I think I may have lost it, so that's okay. Actually, you might be able to see there is a white up there. So those are the two natural colors that I got out of this batch. Sometimes I can get white out of it. It just depends how much color there is. So this time I got these two colors out of it, and then I over dyed the yarn to get some colors out of it. So over dyeing is simply when you have a natural color that's not white, basically, and you dye over that. Simple idea, right? So here's some of the colors that I have over dyed. So we have a nice tonal orange. And look at that. So fun, that pink. And I did it tonal. I mean, anytime you dye over gray, depending, but see how this gray has such different colors in it already that it's gonna sort of be tonal anyway, and then I just accentuated that. Here's a green that you can't tell so much, but it is tonal also. We've got a purple, that's pretty obvious. And one last color here is this blue. So I thought I'd show you some things I have knitted on and some projects I'm working on right now. So one of my favorite is this little beanie here. And this is the Barley hat by Tin Can Knits is the pattern. And I just knit it, obviously it just took one skein of our Jacob yarn. I love how it turned out. And Jacob yarn is kind of just, it's a rustic yarn is how it looks out, but then you throw some pink on it and it's slightly less rustic, right? So that is one of my favorites. This is another, and I might have to stand up for this guy. But this is, I think I'm showing you the right side. So this is, I'm gonna do a little close up so you can kind of see the crossovers there. This is the Hipster Shawl by Locatelli, and I'll stand up and let you kind of see how it looks once it's on. Isn't that gorgeous? And I love how you can see the little crossovers there. So this is one of my favorite knits, and it's really squishy. And it's not, like I said, Jacob's not gonna be the softest yarn, but I think it's soft enough to have in a shawl. I can wrap it around my neck, and I just love the rustic look of that in that yarn. Something I'm working on currently is, this is the Courage Shawl by Shannon Cook, and I'm gonna try not to completely drop it off the stitches while I show you. I'm so close to being done, so hopefully by the next time you guys see me, it'll be done. But isn't that stunning? I saw this pattern and I thought it just has something to me that says it needs a beautiful rustic yarn like this. So this is a big shawl. Again, it's called the Courage Shawl, and I do have some kits available in different colors, like I just showed you. But I just love it, and you can just see how it just has so much character in life. So there you go, that's something. And the last thing that I have knit with this, actually I also knit a pair of mitts. It's perfect for mitts, but somebody came into the mill and loved them, so I sold them to her, which happens to me a lot. I make something that I really want, and then somebody that is not a knitter loves it, and how can I deny them, right? The last thing I knit, this is, do you know what this is? Probably not, but you may very well need it. This is an avocado cozy. So you just put your avocado in there, set it on the counter for a little bit, and it gets nice and warm, and it ripens faster, which in Oregon we desperately need, because half the time you buy an avocado and it's hard as a rock. So this is the Avocado Cozy. It's on Ravelry too. It's by Jennifer Emslie is the name, but I don't think there's a lot of avocado cozies. So if you just search patterns, you'll probably find it pretty quick. And that was just a little bit of Jacob wool I had left. So I think that's everything I was going to talk about that yarn for you. And it's in our online shop. You can get it in a kit, like I said, for the Courage Shawl, or we have it in single skeins, of course. And something else that I'm knitting on, I thought I would show you. And I didn't bring, I actually finished one. Funny, somebody on Instagram, I said, I have second sock syndrome. So here's a sock I'm working on. And this is one of our newer yarns that I'll talk about more next time, but this is our Prineville yarn base. And this is a wool and mohair. And I designed this yarn as a sock yarn. So here's two of the colors that I've got in it right now. This is a natural gray, and this I call Mood Swings, I believe. And it'll be my heel. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I was saying, somebody on Instagram, I said, so I did finish one sock, and I don't have it with me, but next time I'll show you guys the first finished sock. But my plan was just to knit one sock as a sample for this yarn, because I'm not much of a sock knitter, and I definitely have second sock syndrome. And this was my first time doing toe up, and I finished it, and it fit so darn perfect that I was like, oh, I guess I'll knit the second sock, right? So somebody on Instagram commented, I heard the best way to get over second sock syndrome is to knit the second sock first. I'm sorry, it made me laugh. But next time I'll show you the finished sock, and maybe I'll have 2 done and my Courage shawl done. The one thing about our lifestyle is that I don't always get to knit or spin every day. So it may take me a little bit longer to finish some projects, but I'm trying to really focus in on using my yarn more, and not only for samples, just so I know how they're knitting up, and because I made them, right? So that's a little bit of what I am working on right now. I'm gonna take you guys on a little tour around the mill and let you see what the space is like that I work in, and see some of the equipment. I'll give you a little brief description of what everything does in the back there. And next week we'll carry on, and I'll have a little bit more. I'll talk about hand spinning a little bit more. You can kind of see where I'm at with what I'm knitting on, and then we'll talk about the mill and what I'm working on back there that week, and what's going on, and hopefully have some footage of me using some of the equipment so you can learn a little bit more about how it's done and what it's like. So thanks so much for joining me. I hope you'll come back again, please, if you like us, if you like me. I feel like, if you like me, but hit the like button if you do, and subscribe so that you know when the next one comes out, and hopefully it'll be about 2 weeks, and I think that's it. So thank you all for joining me. Take care, stay healthy, and I will see you soon. Bye. Okay guys, so I am outside of the mill. I just thought I'd show you the windows because I love them. So you can see this is a very old building. It was built in about the 1870s. Excuse the background music. I wish it was music. Noise. And a nice thing about being here is we have ended up inheriting quite a few wheels and looms from community people. So we'll go ahead and take a walk in. So this is the space in the mill. If you've been following us on social media or any places like that, I'm sure you've kind of caught glimpses. But we had a shop in here for a while, and hopefully I will again. But right now, especially with COVID, it's just become a space for me to work, really. And I've got my packaging, and you can see there's bins everywhere. Bins of finished fiber is usually what's up here, fibers and yarns. And we're gonna take a walk back to the very back where the mill is. So this is where all of my magic happens every day. And I'm walking you straight back to the washing machine, which is where it starts. Well, actually, that's not true. It starts on the sheep with the shepherds, and then getting shorn, and then me going and getting it, and then skirting, etc., until we get here. And this is my wash tub here. I'm going to open it up for you because it just finished running a batch. You can see the steam coming off of it. But this is some lovely horn Dorset that I'm processing up for a client. And I do custom processing as well as my own processing and my own animal processing as well for their fibers. So, but I buy a lot of it because I only have a small flock, and I'll let you in on my flock details later. So this is the drying rack here. And you can see it's not anything fancy. There's a fan up top that just circulates air. There's no heat, it's just circulating air. And I can show you what's in the drying rack right now. We've got this is some Romney wool. And this is actually some Border Leicester. And you can see there's little bits of EM. I'll pick at it as it goes through. Always picking stuff out. So the next step after stuff is dry is going into the picker. And you can see I've got some fiber here. This is the next thing that's going to get picked out. And this is alpaca. And underneath it, this is actually the same fleece that was on the top. This is some other Romney wool. Same fleece that was in the top of the dryer. This is just the lighter portion of it. And I'll be blending this with the alpaca and the silk for a friend who wanted our custom. That's actually our custom signature fiber, but I'm doing a special batch up just for her because she wants to spin a sweater. And I've got some more fibers going here. This is kind of my waiting line here. So in here we have got, oh, that's more of the border luster that was on the dryer. And we also have, I believe this is a border luster too, and you can kind of see there's some brown in there. So these are kind of my waiting list, waiting for the picker. And then we've got the carder over here. I don't have anything set up on the carder today, but don't worry, I will share it with you. So there's the carder. Fiber gets fed into the one end and then comes out the other end here, either in roving or in bat form. So there she is. Going into the draw frame is the next, and you can see some fibers here that are lined up getting ready for me to feed. And what's in here, this is our Prineville base getting ready to become yarn. So this is a wool and mohair blend, and the mohair adds some extra strength to the wool. It also adds some extra shine to the wool, which is never a bad thing, right? So this is our pin drafter, and what this machine does is it continues to, I'll open it up and you can kind of see, there's a little sort of a teeth in there that continues to comb the fibers out, brush the fibers out so that they become more parallel. The more parallel and even the roving is, you can see it some coming off the end here. The more even and parallel this fiber is, the more even my yarn is going to be, because the next stage is to go to spinning. So we'll pop over to the spinner, and hopefully I'm even enough that I'm not making you. And you can see the spinning room the spinner has its own room, I should say. And that is because it's kind of the most picky of the equipment. It needs not a specific temperature, but if it's too hot, it needs air conditioning. And you can see I've got an air conditioning unit in there. It's also a very loud machine, and it also, really for any part of the mill, a certain amount of humidity is important, and it's exceptionally important in this room. So there's the spinner. We've got bobbins. This is waiting for me to finish up today, and so here's some spun bobbins, and that is our Prineville, what you saw over before in roving form. That's some of it spun up, waiting to be plied, but I'm going to spin a little bit more before I ply it. And then we'll just peek out the window here. You can see that long piece of equipment there. That's the steamer. So once the yarn is plied up, I run it through the steamer and it sets the twist. It steams onto cones. You can see some cones sitting there that have a little bit of yarn on them. And then from cones, I can put it into a skein winder, and that's how we get the skeins that you are buying. So that's kind of behind the scenes of the mill. I'll turn around and walk you back out, and you can see, hopefully I'm not going too fast. If so, we'll just edit it a little bit. You can kind of see what my workspace looks like from the other side. And there's a big loft upstairs. So one day again, we will have classes and have a space to come together and talk fiber and yarn and all the good things. Until then, this is where you can find me. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. I'll see you soon.